Let me fill you in on something that's been quietly unfolding behind the closed doors of NATO headquarters. Something that signals a seismic shift in how America's oldest allies view our role in the world. While most Americans were focused on domestic headlines, European defense ministers met in Brussels last week and made a decision that would have been unthinkable just 5 years ago. They're moving forward with their own defense plans. Without us. According to a leaked memo from the German Defense Ministry obtained by Politico on January 10th, European NATO members have activated contingency protocols originally designed for a complete U.S. withdrawal from the alliance. These aren't theoretical planning documents anymore. They're operational roadmaps. The quiet part just got said out loud, and the implications are staggering. Here's what's happening. Since November 2024, President Trump has escalated his demands that NATO allies immediately increase defense spending to 5% of GDP, more than double the current 2% target that most members still haven't met. His ultimatum, delivered via Truth Social and confirmed by unnamed White House officials speaking to CBS News, was blunt. Pay up within 6 months, or America reconsiders its Article 5 commitments. Article 5, for those who need a refresher, is the cornerstone of NATO, the principle that an attack on one member is an attack on all. It's the security guarantee that has prevented World War III for 75 years. Trump's threat to make that guarantee conditional on payment represents, according to foreign policy historian Dr. Margaret Sullivan of Georgetown University, the most fundamental challenge to the transatlantic alliance since its founding in 1949. The European response tells you everything you need to know. On December 18th, French President Emmanuel Macron convened an emergency meeting of EU defense ministers in Paris. On January 3rd, Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced a €100 billion special defense fund. But here's the kicker. It's specifically earmarked for European-only defense capabilities that don't rely on U.S. systems or coordination. Poland, the Baltic states, and Nordic countries followed within days, each unveiling plans for regional defense cooperation that conspicuously omit American involvement. According to reporting from the Financial Times on January 9th, these aren't symbolic gestures. We're talking about procurement contracts for European-made fighter jets instead of American F-35s. Joint ammunition production facilities that bypass U.S. supply chains, intelligence sharing frameworks that operate independently of American satellites and systems. Now here's where it gets interesting. The Trump administration apparently thought they were negotiating from strength. Classic Trump playbook: demand the impossible, extract concessions, declare victory. Except this time, the allies aren't blinking, they're building alternatives. Dr. Thomas Kleine Brockhoff, a former German government advisor now at the German Marshall Fund, put it this way in a January 8th interview with Der Spiegel. For the first time since 1949, European leaders are seriously planning for a post-American security architecture. This isn't about resisting American demands. It's about accepting American unreliability as a permanent condition. Let's break this down, because the pattern here isn't new. It's just reaching a critical inflection point. Remember how Trump treated NATO allies during his first term? In 2018, he publicly questioned whether the U.S. would defend Montenegro, a country smaller than Connecticut, calling them very aggressive people who might trigger World War III. In 2019, according to reporting by the New York Times, he privately told advisors he wanted to withdraw from NATO entirely, a plan only derailed by unified opposition from his own cabinet. Then in 2024, during the campaign, he told a rally audience that he'd encourage Russia to do whatever the hell they want to NATO countries that didn't meet spending targets. Each time European leaders assured their publics these were negotiating tactics. Bluster, presidential theater. But here's what they're realizing now. It's not theater, it's policy. General Curtis Scaparrotti, former Supreme Allied Commander Europe, stated in testimony before the Senate Armed Services Committee on December 4th that Trump's latest demands are strategically incoherent and operationally impossible. You can't increase defense spending by 150% in 6 months. Procurement cycles take years. Training programs take longer. The demand itself reveals either a fundamental misunderstanding of how military readiness works or, and this is what keeps European defense officials up at night, a deliberate attempt to create impossible conditions as pretext for withdrawal. The pattern continues. When German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock pointed out the practical impossibilities during a phone call with Secretary of State Marco Rubio on January 5th, according to a readout leaked to Politico, Rubio's response was telling, "Then I guess we have a problem." No discussion of alternatives, no proposed timeline adjustments, just an implicit threat. It's the same approach Trump took with defense commitments to South Korea, with trade agreements, with the Paris Climate Accord. Make demands designed to be rejected, then use the rejection as justification for abandonment. Here's the historical context that makes this moment so significant. Not since the Suez Crisis of 1956 have European allies moved forward on major security initiatives over explicit American opposition. That crisis, when President Eisenhower forced Britain and France to abandon their invasion of Egypt, taught European leaders a painful lesson. American power was absolute, and defying it came with unbearable costs. For nearly 70 years, that lesson held. European foreign policy operated within parameters set in Washington. Even disagreements, like France's opposition to the Iraq War in 2003, remained just that. Disagreements within a framework of ultimate American leadership. What's happening now is categorically different. According to YouGov polling conducted across 5 European countries between January 2 and the 7th, 68% of respondents now believe European security cannot rely primarily on the United States in the next decade. More striking, among respondents aged 18-34, that number jumps to 79%. This isn't anti-American sentiment in the traditional sense. It's something more fundamental, a generational recognition that the post-Cold War order has ended, and Europe needs independent capabilities for an era of American unpredictability. Now, here's the kicker, the impossible catch-22 that European leaders are trapped in. If they refuse Trump's demands and he follows through on his threats, they face Russian aggression without the American security umbrella that has protected them since 1949. Putin is already watching. Russian military exercises near NATO borders have intensified. On January 11th, according to CNN reporting, Russian forces conducted live-fire drills just 30 kilometers from the Estonian border. The closest such exercises have come to NATO territory in decades. The message was unmistakable. Moscow is testing how serious Trump's threats really are. But here's the other side of the catch-22. If European countries somehow did meet Trump's 5% GDP demand, economically devastating, politically impossible, but hypothetically achievable over years, they'd be building defense capabilities that make American protection less essential. They'd have their own satellite systems, their own intelligence networks, their own rapid reaction forces. At which point the question becomes, why maintain the alliance at all? Why allow American presidents to leverage Article 5 as a protection racket? The very act of meeting Trump's demands would create conditions where European leaders ask, what exactly are we paying for? Dr. Rachel Bronson, president of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists and former State Department official, captured this paradox in a January 13th Foreign Affairs essay. Trump has inadvertently created the conditions for European strategic autonomy that 3 generations of European federalists failed to achieve. By making American protection conditional and capricious, he's forcing Europeans to build capabilities that will ultimately make American protection obsolete. And this is where things fracture in ways that can't be put back together. The alliance is splintering along lines that have nothing to do with capability or commitment, and everything to do with geography and threat perception. Poland and the Baltic states, countries that border Russia or Belarus, are desperately trying to keep American forces engaged, even as they build their own capabilities. Poland just announced plans to increase its armed forces to 300,000 active personnel, making it the largest military in Europe outside Russia. On January 12th, according to Defense News, Warsaw signed contracts for 116 American Abrams tanks and 32 F-35 fighters. A clear signal that they're still betting on American protection, even while hedging with European alternatives. Meanwhile, France and Germany are moving decisively toward European solutions. On January 14th, Paris and Berlin jointly announced the European Sky Shield Initiative, a continental missile defense system explicitly designed to replace U.S.-operated systems. The estimated cost? 200 billion euros over 10 years. The project partners? France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Netherlands, Belgium, and Poland. Conspicuously absent from the planning documents, according to reporting from Jane's Defense Weekly, any U.S. contractors or technology providers. Britain finds itself caught in an excruciating middle position. Brexit was sold partly on promises of a special relationship with America that would compensate for leaving the EU. Now that relationship feels like a liability. Prime Minister Keir Starmer met with French and German leaders in Paris on January 8th to discuss European defense cooperation, a meeting that would have been symbolically impossible for a British leader just 5 years ago. According to a senior British defense official speaking anonymously to The Guardian, we're facing a choice we hoped never to face, America or Europe. The answer is supposed to be both, but Trump's making that impossible. Let's be real for a second. This isn't just about military hardware or budget percentages. This is about trust, about whether sovereign nations can rely on American commitments when they've been explicitly told those commitments are transactional and conditional. German Chancellor Scholz said as much in a January 10th speech to the Bundestag. For 75 years, NATO's strength was not in the size of our arsenals, but in the certainty of our commitments. When that certainty vanishes, the alliance becomes merely a military arrangement. Useful perhaps, but not sacred. Not worth the blood of our children. Those are not words spoken lightly by a German chancellor. They represent a psychological break that's been building for years but crystallizing now. And here's what makes this moment so dangerous. Once trust fractures at this level, it doesn't heal with policy changes or reassurances. It requires generational time and consistent demonstration of reliability, neither of which looks particularly available right now. The legal and constitutional dimensions make everything worse. On January 9th, the European Court of Justice issued an advisory opinion, not legally binding but politically significant, addressing whether EU member states could remain in NATO if the alliance's security guarantees became contingent on financial contributions. The opinion, requested by the Belgian government, concluded that such conditionality would fundamentally alter the treaty's mutual defense obligations in ways incompatible with both the NATO Charter and EU collective security commitments. Judge Cohen Leonards, writing for the court majority, stated, "An alliance of equals cannot function when some members hold protection hostage to financial demands. That is not collective defense. That is a protection racket prohibited under international law." That phrase, protection racket, appeared in official EU judicial language. Let that sink in. Europe's highest court essentially accused the United States of extortion. Whether you agree with that characterization or not, its appearance in a formal legal opinion represents a diplomatic earthquake. It provides legal and political cover for European governments to pursue alternatives to American leadership. It reframes European defense autonomy not as betrayal of the alliance, but as compliance with international law. And here's the expert validation that makes dismissing this as European whining impossible. General James Mattis, Trump's own former Secretary of Defense, stated in a January 7th interview with The Atlantic, "NATO has been the most successful military alliance in human history precisely because it was never transactional. Treating it as a business arrangement where protection is purchased with defense spending fundamentally misunderstands why the alliance exists and how deterrence works." Russia doesn't attack NATO countries because they fear NATO's unity, not its budget. Shatter that unity, and you've destroyed the very thing the spending is supposed to protect. Conservative foreign policy expert Elbridge Colby, who served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense under Trump and is no dove on defense spending, told Fox News on January 11th, "European free-riding on defense has been a legitimate complaint for decades, but there's a right way and a wrong way to address it. Public ultimatums that question Article 5 commitments don't increase European burden sharing. They decrease American influence while accelerating European strategic autonomy. We're achieving the opposite of our stated goals." Even Senator Lindsey Graham, one of Trump's most reliable allies, broke with the president on this issue. Speaking to reporters on January 13th, Graham said, I want Europe to pay more. I've been saying that for 20 years, but I never want them to doubt whether we'd show up. The moment they start planning to go it alone is the moment American power in Europe is finished, and that's exactly what's happening. So, what are the implications of all this? Let's start with the political fallout. Within the administration, there are reportedly deep divisions about whether to double down or walk back the ultimatum. According to NBC News reporting on January 12th, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz has privately urged Trump to soften the 5% demand and extend the timeline. He's reportedly told the president that European capitals are calling his bluff, and continued escalation risks making the U.S. look impotent when allies simply proceed with their own plans. But other advisors, including Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon, who reportedly still speaks regularly with Trump despite not holding an official position, are pushing the opposite direction. Their view, according to sources who spoke with Politico, let Europe go. America spends too much defending rich countries. If they want independence, good, we'll save the money. This internal division mirrors a broader Republican split. Traditional national security Republicans, the McCain-Romney-Cheney wing of the party, are horrified. They see 75 years of bipartisan foreign policy consensus collapsing in real time. But the MAGA populist wing sees Europe's panic as validation. They're cheering Trump for finally forcing change, even if that change means ending the Atlantic Alliance. According to a Pew Research poll released January 10th, Republican voters are split 52-44 on whether NATO membership benefits America, a stunning reversal from 2016 when the split was 77-19 in favor. The institutional damage compounds daily. Career diplomats at the State Department are reportedly demoralized beyond anything they experienced during Trump's first term. According to Foreign Policy Magazine's January 14th, reporting more than 40 senior Foreign Service officers have submitted retirement paperwork since Christmas, citing irreconcilable differences with current policy direction. One departing official, speaking on condition of anonymity, said, "I can defend controversial policies. I can't defend the methodical destruction of alliances that took generations to build. That's not diplomacy. That's vandalism." At NATO headquarters, the mood is reportedly grim. Secretary General Mark Rutte has scheduled an emergency session of the North Atlantic Council for January 20th, 5 days from now. According to Reuters, the agenda includes fundamental questions about the alliance's future structure and American participation. That phrasing, American participation, would have been inconceivable 6 months ago. Now it's an agenda item, and here's the electoral dimension that should terrify both parties. American power and global leadership used to be beyond partisan politics. No more. In the 2026 midterms, now just 10 months away, foreign policy will likely be a defining issue for the first time since the Iraq War. Democrats will argue Trump is dismantling American leadership. Republicans will split between defending Trump's approach and defending the alliance. That split creates opportunities for Democratic challengers in purple districts, where national security credentials matter, but it also energizes the isolationist base that got Trump elected. Early polling is instructive. According to a January 8th YouGov Economist poll, 61% of Americans believe NATO is important for U.S. security, but only 39% believe the U.S. should guarantee European defense even if they don't increase spending. That gap, people who value NATO but not enough to pay for it, is exactly where Trump is operating. It's politically savvy domestically while being strategically catastrophic internationally. Now imagine how this plays out in 2028. If Trump is term limited and a new president tries to repair relationships with Europe, will European leaders believe American commitments? Will they dismantle the parallel defense structures they're building right now? Or will they smile, take meetings, and continue building capabilities that make American protection optional? Because here's the thing about trust once broken at this scale. It doesn't matter what the next president says. European planners will assume the MAGA wing could return in 2032 or 2036 or any election cycle. They'll plan accordingly, which means European strategic autonomy isn't a temporary response to Trump. It's a permanent condition of the post-trust era. The economic implications are equally profound. American defense contractors have enjoyed privileged access to European markets for 75 years. That's ending. France's Dassault Aviation, Germany's Rheinmetall, Sweden's Saab, Britain's BAE Systems, all are positioned to capture market share as European governments shift procurement away from U.S. suppliers. According to defense industry analyst Byron Callan, speaking to Defense News on January 13th, we're looking at potentially $75 billion in lost contracts for U.S. defense firms over the next decade if European procurement shifts toward domestic and intra-European suppliers. That's not just revenue, that's jobs, innovation, and industrial capacity. Here's where things get really complicated. A strategically autonomous Europe might actually be good for American interests, in theory. It would free U.S. resources to focus on China, the real long-term strategic competitor. European militaries that can defend themselves reduce the burden on American forces. This has been the stated goal of U.S. policy for decades. Except Trump isn't pursuing European strategic autonomy as calculated policy. He's forcing it through chaos and ultimatums that breed resentment rather than partnership. The outcome might be similar to what policy experts wanted, but the process ensures it happens with maximum damage to American influence and credibility. Think about how this looks from Beijing. Chinese leadership is watching European allies conclude they can't rely on American commitments. They're watching Republican voters cheer as traditional alliances fracture. They're watching American credibility collapse in real time. What conclusions do you think they're drawing about American commitments to Taiwan, to South Korea, to Japan? If NATO, the most successful alliance in human history, can't trust American guarantees, why should Asian allies feel confident? This is the cascading erosion of American power that can't be reversed with tough talk or new weapon systems. It's based on something more fundamental, the belief that America keeps its word. Once that belief evaporates, everything else, our military strength, our economic leverage, our technological superiority, matters less because nobody trusts how we'll use it. The next few weeks are crucial. NATO's emergency session on January 20th will either produce a face-saving compromise or formalize the split that's already happening behind the scenes. Watch what European leaders say versus what they do. They'll likely offer diplomatic language about alliance solidarity while simultaneously accelerating procurement for European-only defense systems. That gap between rhetoric and action tells you everything about where this is headed. The stakes have never been higher. We're not just talking about defense budgets or burden-sharing formulas. We're talking about whether the Atlantic Alliance, the bedrock of American power since World War II, survives the next 4 years. Whether our grandchildren grow up in a world where American leadership is assumed, or where it's remembered as something that used to exist before it was traded for some perceived short-term political advantage. European capitals are already planning for a post-American future. The question isn't whether that future is coming. The question is whether America chooses it deliberately or stumbles into it through strategic incompetence dressed up as tough negotiation. Right now, it looks a lot like the latter, and once we cross that threshold, there's no going back.